Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimberry, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. I will often go into classrooms and I might see written on the board, students will consider the causes of, students will think about. The issue with that is it's really hard to know what a student is actually understanding. You don't know exactly the level to which they are thinking. I'm really excited to be talking about how to make thinking visible. And we have a return guest joining us, Alice Vigors. She is a school administrator in Australia. She wrote originally her first book, The Thinking Classroom, and she came on the podcast to talk about the Thinking Classroom. And she just published her second book, The Learning Classroom, talking about how to make thinking visible. So, Alice, really excited to have you back on the show tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me back, John. It's a really awesome opportunity to talk with you again and share more about the second book.
Indeed. And I'm going to give a plug to your podcast, the Teacher Takeaway podcast, because you will have lots of interesting guests on your podcast as well. Let's get right into the meat and potatoes of this, because as we said, you've been on the show before talking about thinking and the role of thinking. We're now talking about the learning classroom and making thinking visible. When we think about and when we talk about a learning classroom, what does that mean to you?
I guess there's a few kind of facets for me around what that means. The first one, and it's the way that I start the book, is having a really strong understanding around how students learn and diving into that cognitive and psychological research around how our students learn best so that we can have those strong foundations in which to build the learning that we want for our students and understanding around where they're headed. So it's understanding how students learn, knowing the content and how to teach it, but also looking at some of the strategies that we can use and drawing a lot from the work of John Hattie around visible learning, looking at building in your learning intentions and success criteria and how they support the development of clarity in a classroom so that the learners have a strong understanding around, okay, here's what I'm learning, here's what it's going to look like when I'm successful, and here's the kinds of thinking I need to do to be successful in the classroom. So it's using those strategies and those tools to frame the learning journey that you do, whether that's for a single lesson or more broadly over time, and looking at the role that feedback plays in the classroom and looking at how we can leverage feedback to be more effective so that our learners aren't just picking up their book after you've taken your books home as a teacher and marked them at home and then taken them on a journey back to school and you pass it back to the student and go, okay, there's your feedback around the learning from yesterday or a couple of days ago. We want to be able to be responsive in the way that we're teaching and provide feedback to our learners that in that moment helps them to achieve success and helps them to achieve that intent for learning that we've set, how we can build in some self-reflection so that they're able to monitor how they're going, they're able to identify where they're going next, what is it I need to do next in my learning to be able to achieve that success criteria and that learning intention, providing educators with tools to help support in that space.
So if I heard you correctly, Alice, it's really three main things: clarity in what students are expected to know and do, what they are expected to demonstrate. Then there's also the piece about around feedback. What
Mhm.
is quality feedback to again improve the learning that one is doing or achieving? And then third, when we talk about feedback, it's not just feedback from the teacher to the student, but student self-assessment and peer assessment.
Yes.
So then let's break those apart. Let's parse those out. So when we talk about clarity in learning objectives, like I mentioned before, I will sometimes see a learning objective written in the form of students will consider, students will think about, and often the feedback I'll have for educators is, yeah, this is great. You have them thinking about something, but how do you know that they know it? And also, what is success? What are some ways you recommend we set up learning intentions, essential questions, and success criteria?
Mm. One of the things, and I mean, making it visible to the students and really unpacking, say, a learning intention with them, it's really important that it's broad. It's not a super narrow learning intention, because we want to be able to leave it open and broad enough that we can build on it and we can build the skills into it. So it could be that the learning intention might be that we are learning to understand how authors build tension in a storyline. And that's open and broad enough that you can pull lots of elements into it to be able to scaffold and build that learning. Some of the success criteria around that might be, and I'm a big believer in only having four. Four, I think, is the nice sweet spot in terms of having your success criteria support your learning intention. It's enough that we're not going to cognitively overload our learners. And we want to find that happy medium, that sweet spot where it's just enough, but it's not too much that they can't achieve success, because we want to set all kids up for success, but also have that level of challenge built into it. You want to be linking your success criteria to not so much, here's the process that you're going to do, but what are the skills, what are the things that I'm wanting my kids to be able to demonstrate so they can achieve that learning intention? How is it that they are going to show that they have an understanding around how authors build tension? What is that going to look like? So it might be that they're able to identify elements of tension used by multiple authors. So it's not just, can they identify it in one text that we're studying, but can they also identify it in other examples of literature? Can they experiment with tension building techniques, whatever it might be that you're focusing on, and whatever the level of your kids are? You using your success criteria as we're going to learn and build these skills so that you can achieve this. This is our end goal. Our learning intention is our end goal, and here is how we're going to work together to get there. It could be you have a learning intention that covers just a single lesson, or it could be something that spans a unit of learning. If you're looking at the example of the learning intention that I gave, it could be one that you're going to cover over multiple lessons. It's quite a meaty one. One of the ways that I focus on the four and I build in opportunities throughout the learning experience to help the kids monitor how they're going, so that we unpack that learning intention, we unpack the language. What is it you need to know and understand about where we're going and what you're going to be learning about or learning to do? And the same with the success criteria, unpacking what that means, looking at the verbs. A really big believer in being able to help the kids identify. If I'm asking you to explain, if the beginning verb of our success criteria says explain, here's what that looks like. Here's the type of thinking you're going to be needing to do, and build in scaffolds into the learning experience to help them explain or help them to identify or help them to compare and contrast, but giving those kids that understanding of here's what that verb means, here's what it looks like, I'm going to model it for you, let's experiment with it, let's have a go together before I ask you to explain independently so that you can show me that you understand what that looks like. Every time we see the word explain or identify, because I'm intentional in building that with my kids, they go, oh, I have to explain. So here are the skills that I need.
Those action verbs, right? Explain, identify, distinguish, articulate, all of them are visible. To your point, how do we provide the scaffolds, or what are the scaffolds to allow the students to do that? So when in the future they see the verb explain, oh, this is what I'm going to do for myself. So they'll need you less if they know how to explain because they've done that over and over again. What could be some of those scaffolds that you would give students, particularly if they're new to explanation?
I quite like thinking routines because they're really versatile and you can use them for lots of different things. There's some really simple and easy ones, and you can even start with, and you quite often start in the verbal space before you even get the kids writing. Simple things like when a child shares something with you, what makes you say that? Getting them to think and verbally explain. Okay, we're going to build some explanation in. I'm going to ask you what makes you say that, which means I want you to tell me why you're making that statement or what it is about whatever it is we're talking about. There's some other ones that you can do with partner work. So things like give one, get one, which I quite like using. You write down your thoughts around whatever the topic that you've given might be. And you go and find a partner and you say to them, here's my idea and here's why I think it's important, or here's why this connects with that. So if you're looking at how authors build tension, you might ask kids to write down all the different ways this author uses or builds tension, and looking at how do they connect? What are the similar strategies that they might use? What are the tools, the techniques? Getting the kids up and discussing. I might come to you and say, oh, this author did this and I think it connects to this author in this way. And you might go, oh, I didn't get that, but this is what I got. And you're sharing your thoughts and ideas. And they're having to explain to others their connection or why things are important or whatever it is that you want them to focus on. Getting them to start sharing their ideas with others so that I walk away and go, oh, I hadn't thought about what John had said. I hadn't picked up on that connection, but I'm really glad I chose you as my partner. Now I'm going to go to the next partner. So by the time that you start to get the kids building a broader idea of the concept you're exploring, they've been able to share their ideas with others. They've also got ideas from others as well. So they're building their knowledge and building that understanding. And obviously you then bring it back and you talk together. But it allows your kids who probably, I don't want to say they're not capable, the kids that might struggle a little bit. I can picture these kids where idea generation is not their thing. Like they really struggle to think about ideas, or particularly when they're a little bit more abstract. It allows them to go, okay, I might think of only one idea, but I'm going to go and talk to someone who has another idea who's going to help me build my idea bank. So that by the time you come to getting the kids to writing about how authors build tension and the connections and the strategies and the different techniques authors use, little Johnny over here, who might have only started with one idea, and if you sent them straight to writing would really struggle, now has visited 3 or 4 other people, has got more ideas that they can draw on, and you can help that person to scaffold that. And the same with the other end of the spectrum. When you've got kids who really thrive in that space and who can think of lots of ideas, so you're naturally gifted in the writing space or whatever it might be, you can then use that as a platform then to push and extend. You can do that spectrum of students and do it in a way that's not threatening.
Your own learning. Let's switch gears a little bit. You were also talking about, Alice, feedback. And so can you go into a little bit more detail? What do you mean that the learning classroom can really enhance feedback?
One of the things in learning classrooms that I foster is that feedback is directly connected with your learning intention and success criteria. It's not we're doing a writing piece and here are the success criteria, but I'm going to really focus on these things over here that have nothing to do with how I've set the lesson up or the unit up. So really making sure that those connections are strong, so that if I say that we're looking at identifying pieces, evidence of tension in literature, and we've done a task around that, that the feedback that I provide is on your ability to identify evidence of tension across pieces of literature. That's where my feedback focuses. It's not focused on, oh, can you spell this word? Yes, there might be times when I comment on that, but my feedback is centered around what we're focusing on, because I want you to achieve success for the broader learning intention. I share that we really want to be intentional with our learning intentions, how we set that up with the kids. We're intentional with the success criteria and that explanation of verbs. We're also intentional with the feedback that we provide, so that it's all connected. If this is what we're learning and here's how we're going to achieve success towards that, then the feedback I provide links directly to that. In that, getting the kids to provide feedback, so whether it's peer-to-peer feedback or feeding back to me, it's all interconnected with that learning intention and success criteria. And we build in pause points in your learning time, where I will turn and say to the kids, all right, we're just going to pause our lesson for a minute and we're going to reflect on where we're at. So let's look at our success criteria. If we're identifying evidence of tension between pieces of literature, where are we at with that? Let's reflect. Let's look at how successful we're being. Show me some evidence that either tells me you've achieved that or you're working towards, and getting them to, it's not an add-on at the end where, oh, we're just going to pause and reflect at the end of our lesson and summarize what we've done, because that, we know, time is of the essence in a classroom, and that's what's always left off the end because we run out of time. So making sure that we're building in little snippets of time to pause and reflect, to provide that feedback in an ongoing way. It's not a, I'm going to take all the books home, I'm going to mark them and give you feedback a couple of days later. I want the feedback to be actionable. So if I can see a kid who's, oh, I haven't got there yet, help me to understand where you're at. Let's look at what our next step is, so that I can scaffold and chunk for the ones that are really struggling in that space, or I can help the other end of the spectrum to go, okay, here's our next steps. Here's what I want you to do next. Here is how I think that you can push yourself that little bit further in that learning. So I think, yeah, there are a few things. For me.
Alice, what really resonates with me, and this is an aha moment, is when you were just saying to implement or integrate those pause moments to reflect. As a coach, Alice, I'm often asking teachers to make sure that they get to the end of a lesson. And so to do that, I'm a stickler with time. Your introduction should be this long. Your mini lecture should be this long. Practice should be this long. Use a digital clock. It doesn't just help your students, it helps you, i.e., you have 5 more minutes for this. We have 3 more minutes for that. But what I really liked with your saying is, at those times where for whatever reason you don't get to the end, if you're building in those moments of reflection, at least they are getting that reflection in if you don't get to the end of a lesson. What are your views on, say, rubrics?
I think rubrics definitely have a place. You obviously have to train your learners how to use them, and I guess the purpose of why you might have a rubric. I think, it's definitely helpful, particularly with your older kids who can understand how to build that. Younger kids, probably you'd have to heavily scaffold.
Right.
You have to develop that understanding around, here's the rubric and here's what it means, here's what I do with it, here's how I use it as a learner to help shape my learning. With younger students, using things like even just your simple smiley faces or your traffic light system, yes, I'm understanding, but it's not just, I've said I've understand, because kids could say that and truly not have any kind of understanding. But I get the kids to identify evidence in their work. So if you're telling me, yes, you understand how to do X, Y, or Z, then show me an example of that in your learning. Can you prove it? Can you show me, if we're looking at our youngest learners, can you show me where you've used a full stop? If that's part of learning how to formulate simple sentences, part of that is that you can start with a capital letter, finish with a full stop. Can you show me evidence of that? If we're looking at, can we use figurative language in writing? Where's an example of that in your writing? How have you used it? How has it enhanced your work? And so I find that it really bodes well to responsive teaching. And it's not just feedback for the kids and helping them to self-reflect, but it also helps me as the teacher to go, okay, here's who's truly understanding. I can formatively assess in the moment as we go and go, okay, Sally, John, and Todd, they've got it. They can show me examples. They're working on their next steps. These chunk of kids here, they got it, but they need that little bit more instruction to help them really get there. And these kids over here, they're really struggling. They have no idea. I need to adjust my teaching, explain it in a different way to help them understand. And it allows you to do that on the go. It's feedback to the student, but also back to the teacher around how things are traveling in the lesson.
As you were talking of all the work I do with educators around checks for understanding, one practice I see a lot of is give me a thumbs up, give me a thumbs down. Do you get it? Do you don't, or do you not get it? And I as well will often find myself having conversations with teachers going, are you sure they really get it? Are you sure? Most adults are not self-secure to put a thumbs down. So if the student does, if you are using thumbs up and thumbs down, I like your point of asking for that evidence. That's the next step to really show they understand. And that could be done in the form of whiteboards, even giving all your students whiteboards. Your example about give me a sentence. How do you know it's a start and it ends? It starts with a capital and ends with, and as we say here on this side of the pond, a period, right?
Yeah.
Or full stop. Doesn't matter if they could identify it. I don't care what they call it. So then maybe everyone holds up their whiteboard with an example of a sentence with a start and a finish. I'm really glad that you mentioned that because it ties, I think, very nicely in with all of the checks for understanding, at least that we do here in the States, around signaling, thumbs up, thumbs down, cold calling. I also recommend folks use signal cards. Is the statement true or false? Yes or no? Is the answer A, B, C, D? But then following up with that evidence piece so you truly know that the students understand that. Now, you were also talking, Alice, about not just feedback student to teacher and teacher to student, but you were also mentioning peer feedback and student self-assessment and peer feedback. Can you talk us through a little bit more what you mean about student self and peer reflection?
So what in that space, I again tie it heavily to your learning intentions and success criteria. We want the kids to be able to reflect on how they're going towards achieving success, but the same in terms of your peers. You want to be able to check on how your peer is going with achieving the learning intentions and success criteria. So what I do with the kids is really, like we do with any routines we build into the classroom, heavily scaffold in the beginning. And we start with the self-reflection space. We use tools like little smiley faces on a continuum, especially for the younger ones. It's a nice, easy visual, easy for them to draw. Traffic lights are another really good one, the green, yellow, and red, or having those as your little cups on a desk is a really nice, easy way to build that self-reflection in to your lesson. As you mentioned, whiteboards. I love a whiteboard. And at any age, whiteboards are brilliant. You can use them in high schools too. They still love them. Building that into showing me an example. When you're doing whiteboard work, one of the easiest ways to start building in peer feedback is to do a turn and talk. I'm going to turn to my partner, share my idea, or it might be the answer is this, what might be the question, the mathematical concept, share that with my peer, explore that, unpack that. I might give the kids some prompts, some questions to ask their partner around how did you get to that answer? Can you show me an example of this? And then they share back their work. So they're getting the initial peer-to-peer, and it's all initially verbal. It's quite easy to start with using those kinds of strategies. And once the kids have a good understanding around how do I give feedback to a peer in a constructive way, you really have to build and scaffold that using sentence stems or prompts for the kids, particularly if you're getting them to provide feedback around, say, a written piece of work, is really important so that the kids don't damage the self-esteem of their peers when they go, oh, that's just a rubbish piece of work. No, you have to ask questions. You have to ask for examples of how they've used it. And it's almost like the conversations I would have with kids when I'm asking them to show me an example of this. And I model it all the time with the kids. Here's what our peer-to-peer feedback looks like. I'd like to see, and they have their success criteria with them. Next time I'd like to see you work on this, or I've noticed you've done this. And they only focus on one thing so that we're not cognitively overloading the kids when they're trying to identify evidence in other people's work. It also, once you build in those routines and strategies, helps you to see who can not only identify it in their own work, but who can spot it and notice it in other people's work. So have you got that level of understanding that you can see it in multiple situations, multiple people's work, multiple pieces of learning, and then be able to talk and explain that with your peer. I'm going to go back to your kindergarten space. So say you've got your simple sentence again, you're wanting the kids to be able to identify your capital letters, your periods, or your full stops, whatever you call them. You could even use counters, color counters. Right, I want you to go around with your yellow counter, find all the examples in people's work where they've used full stops. Different colored counter, subject, the predicate. You can do that with your youngest learners in terms of being able to identify. If you come to a piece of work that doesn't have it, that's a cause for, okay, let's look at what's missing. What do we need to do to make this a complete sentence or show that we finished the sentence?
Alice, how do you feel about student portfolios and student-led conferencing?
I think they have value. I've had parent-teacher interviews where it was the kids as well, and we've used a portfolio of a variety of work, not just your perfect finished products, the things that were in the works that show how we're developing as learners. I find your student-led conferences really valuable, sitting and unpacking things with the kids, but having opportunities to invite the parents into that conversation. So it's not just we're all on the same page. When I sit with a parent and I say, your child really does really well at this, but they're learning to do this, having the kid be there to explain where they're at with their learning, what they're finding success in, where they think their next steps are. All right, let's build some goals into where are you heading next? What do you think you need to be successful here in this space, in that subject, whatever it might be, so that it's a three-way conversation, because at the end of the day, it has to be student-centered. We want the students to be successful, and there's no point not having the students part of that conversation. Help the child know where they are, where they're going, and how they're going to get there is really powerful in helping them to become an independent learner and help them to identify, okay, here's what I'm doing really well. I have strengths. Here's what I'm successful at so far. Here's where I'm working on. This is the area that I need to grow, and this is what I'm going to do to be able to get there, so that you can track and monitor that over time. The next time you have your student conference, you can go back and go, okay, here's where we were. Where are we now? How did you achieve that? Where are you also achieving really well at this point in time? What's your next goal? It helps them to see that we're always learning. We're building that lifelong learning skills to go, all right, I'm going to evaluate where I am, work out where I'm going, and create a plan so I know how to get there.
I tell you, Alice, you had me at the word conference. When you talk about learning over time, I was thinking about the benefit of student conferencing, portfolio assessment, and student-led conferences from year to year. This is where I started. This is where I ended up. This is my new starting point with you, Mr. John or Mr. Shimbari. To your point about the value of student-led conferencing, that's another piece of value or another golden nugget that I take from conferencing. Let's talk about your books and your research. Alice, you wrote the first book that we talked about, The Thinking Classroom. You now wrote this book that we've just talked about, The Learning Classroom. So, what's similar in those books? What's different? What prompted you to write the second book?
The second book stemmed from having written the first book. I worked with a number of schools, one in particular in Canada, which took a lot of the learning from the first book, but we extended and expanded into the space that the second book touches on. As I was working with this particular school, I only touched on some of this stuff in the first book. It's like, I need to expand and I need to write another book, all the stuff that I'm doing with this school and helping them. So it was how the second book came about. And some of what I touch on in the first book is in the second book, but in an expanded version. So the first book, I only slightly touch on learning intentions and success criteria, whereas in the second book, I really dive deeper and unpack that. There's still a lot of thinking routines in the book.
I want to interject here, Alice, to your point about knowing you and your thinking routines. Just want to remind folks, and I remember this from our first conversation, you have a lot of those thinking routines listed in your first book, ready to use, ready to play.
Yes, and all QR coded to my website. The second book, I list some of them. I don't go into some of the detail that I do in the first book, but there are examples, particularly when I'm looking at feedback and building self-reflective learners. I dive a little bit deeper into some of the routines in that space. Some of the differences are around starting the book with how students learn, framing the way the book sits in terms of making sure that we're checking for understanding, that we're mindful of the cognitive load, that we're chunking learning for students, that things are logical and sequential, all those kinds of things is how the book begins being framed. And the rest of what sits in the book works to support the research around how students learn. The end of the book, just like I did with the first one, looks at how do we plan to make learning visible in the classroom and how do we lead that work as well. So there's stuff in there for teachers and leaders around what does that look like in a practical planning sense. The leadership side I looked more at the first book looks more like an action inquiry cycle, whereas this book looks at some of the routines that you can use as a leader to lead the work that you do with your teams and using questioning prompts and things like that when you're analysing data. What questions do I ask when I'm with my team around the data that we're looking at, and how do we use that to shape learning moving forward?
Alice, what have we not talked about that you want our listeners to know?
One of the things that we haven't talked about is connecting this work with the curriculum, the content. All of these strategies, pedagogical practices that we use all have to support your development of content knowledge. And one of the things that I think we haven't spoken about is the importance of making sure that we are providing opportunities for students to work through the phases of learning and to develop and deepen their level of understanding. The phases of learning come from the work of Hattie and his colleagues, but it looks at surface, deepen, transfer are the three kind of words most people will have heard of. Surface learning or developing a surface level of understanding, I think teachers often equate that to that's just the basic work for your less capable kids, but it's actually not. It's looking at acquiring that basic level of foundational understanding that you need in order to be able to dive deeper into a concept. You have to have your basics, your foundation, in order to continue to build your house. And You can't work towards building a deeper level of understanding if you don't have those basic surface level understanding. In the book, I work to unpack those three spaces and really help teachers to understand why all three are important when you're looking at developing students' content knowledge and understanding and the skills that they require to be able to achieve success in any particular academic year. But it also looks at some of the different strategies that you might employ at each of those different phases to help the kids. So it might be different tools, it could be a particular type of thinking routine that might support educators in that space. But that was one of the things that is in the book that we hadn't talked about.
So when you say surface level, would that be more or less meeting the basic learning objectives, standard, aim?
In the book, I talk about it being that initiation to, and it's that early understanding of new ideas that you begin to then work with the kids to develop that deeper conceptual understanding of a concept or a skill.
So if we take a math concept, it's actually understanding that symbols and formulas represent actual numbers and real situations. For example, in math, I'm doing a lot of work with folks to flip the mini lecture from I do, we do, you do to you do, we do, I do, where students practice something first, they try to figure it out. Maybe they use manipulatives, blocks, that sort of thing. Then we do it together, and then I show you how to do it. The other concept in math that we see a lot here in the States is CRA, giving a conceptual understanding of why we're learning what we're learning. So if it's addition, 3 red blocks and 4 blue blocks, and actually having kids manipulate those things, moving more to a representational model, images, that sort of thing, bar graphs, diagrams, and then working on knowing the math formula, the symbols, that sort of thing. So is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. In order for kids to say be able to work with the multiplication tables, they have to have that foundational understanding around groups of and arrays and being able to, say, manipulate objects. If I've got, say, 6 counters, I'm going to show me one way to represent those in a group, and then tying that with, okay, so if I've got 2 rows of 3, how do I represent that with, say, numbers and symbols, and connecting that, your conceptual knowledge, dragging it into your abstract where the kids are seeing that formula or that concept, but they have to have the conceptual understanding first before they're able to then access and work with and manipulate the abstract concept.
So the surface level would be the conceptual.
Yep.
All right. And then in terms of Hattie's work, the extent, what was its extension, the surface level, and then what were the other two?
So developing a deeper understanding and then transfer of learning.
So then doing the representation of the math and then the abstract would be the deeper learning and then the transfer.
Might transfer that to a different situation that you might be working in, say, the science space. So, here's what we've been working on in maths and here's how it relates to the field of science or geography or whatever it might be. Looking at that application of, here's a new situation, let's apply what we've learned here to this new situation and see how it fits and works and things like that.
Alice, we've talked about a lot of different aspects of developing a learning classroom. We've even revisited many of the topics in your first book, developing a thinking classroom, because obviously thinking and learning go hand in hand. Where can people find out more about you and the work that you do if they want to get in touch with you and learn more about your work?
I'm on LinkedIn, Alice Vigors. You can connect with me there. I do have a website, thinkingpathways.weebly.com. All of the thinking routines, the books, they're all on there. If you'd like a signed copy, I'm happy to sign one and send it to you. All of the thinking routines, some of the other stuff that I have worked on and developed freely and openly shared with colleagues. I'm also on Instagram as Thinking Pathways, and Facebook as Thinking Pathways.
Great. And then again, people can also listen to you and hear your great thoughts on your podcast as well, correct?
Yeah, Teacher Takeaway podcast. So I do that with 3 other educational leaders here in Australia. We're up to season 5 at the moment, which is really exciting.
That's great. Alice, thank you so much for your time as always. I appreciated it.
Oh, thanks for having me on again, John. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.